Okay, we're going to get started. So we've been trying, I shouldn't say we, Trevor has been trying to manage two different sets of tech here. So thank you, Trevor, for that. Most of you know Tom. A few of you don't. But Tom was in the Summer Institute of 2011, correct? And was at the time a teacher in an LAC at Churchill. And I'm going to let him tell you the story of his journey from that point on. So I'm just going to hand it over to Tom.
Okay, thanks. When I did this presentation, it was the Summer Institute, yeah. It was a lecture hall filled with people taking the session, mostly for the first time, some with the second time through. So I know this isn't the same audience. With that in mind, my understanding was this would be presented in future summer sessions. Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we, at least for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, pretend that this is a new audience and that you're not all as well versed in UDL as you are. This will be kind of like those episodes of Car Talk on NPR where they say, this has been recorded already, don't call in.
Several years ago.
Yeah, so you'll know a lot of these answers and stuff that I'm leading to, but I think for what you're looking for, that would be the most useful. Yes?
We want it TED Talk style so we can show it in workshops and things like that. So you're going to have to stand up on stage and do your thing.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started.
It's important to add.
Product placement. Anyway, the title of my brief presentation is Confessions of a UDL Convert, and I don't think that's really accurate of a title, because as we'll talk through today in the next few minutes, lots of the things that Jen has proposed and lots of the things that UDL embodies, I didn't have to be converted to. And like a lot of you, I was already doing them, but under different kinds of names and different titles from different professional development workshops. But before we get into that, just so I can get a general idea, how many of you are elementary teachers? Can you raise your hand, please? Okay, great, great. Middle school? Okay, high school? Okay, great. How many of you are in Winnipeg 1? Awesome. Oh, this is being recorded. Maybe that's not so awesome, so somebody eventually will hear my stuff. Anybody out in the Sunrise School Division? Okay, that's where my kids go. It's a really, really neat, tiny rural school division. Lots of good things there. It's a little odd working in the largest school division in Manitoba and then going to parent conferences in one of the smallest ones. There's great things to compare and contrast. But let me start anyway. It would probably be useful for me to talk a little bit about this. Okay, this is my 10-year-old son, Tommy. And this is him just prior to getting his braces put on. Thank God Winnipeg 1 has a good dental plan. Take a look at those choppers. And this is one of those pictures that completely embodies who he is. He's all boy. He's completely mischievous. And I did name him after myself so I can have that grasp of immortality. As I die, my name will go on. But I'd like to start off with his picture because I have two children. Tommy is 10 and Aiden is 11. And we, like most parents, work really hard on manners at the dinner table. We eat just about every meal together, and we work on things like not interrupting, like not chewing with your mouth full, like sitting properly in the chair. If you're a parent, you know you constantly wrestle with your kids about how they sit in their chairs at the dinner table. Anyway, like I said, one of the things we wrestle with Tommy and his sister a lot about is not interrupting somebody when they're in the middle of a conversation. And we've had some really good success with that. About a month ago, my wife, Shandy, had one of her friends over for dinner. And her friend, who we're going to call Sherry, was having dinner with us, and Tommy was telling a story about what had happened that day at school. And Sherry interrupted him and went on with another topic. And he looked over at me, and he went like this. And so, I just kind of hushed him, and went on with the conversation. And so then he started again about what had happened that day at school. And then again, Shandy's friend, Sherry, interrupted him. And he turns to me and he goes, "Who is this lady?" Okay, so who is this guy on the stage right now trying to do a bad TED Talk? My name is Tom Walls. First thing we should talk about is that I'm an American. You don't need to laugh at that. There's nothing inherently funny about that. It's one of those crazy things. I'll be in the classroom, and when I talk to kids about history lessons, I'll make a reference to Mexico, I'll say Mexicans, and kids laugh. And I have to stop and say, why are we laughing at that? I don't understand why that's funny. I'm an American. No, I do not own a gun, and yes, I did have excellent health care. I moved up here about 4 years ago. My wife, Shandy, is from Manitoba. She's from a little town called Oakbank, where we live. And we met overseas, and she was brave enough to come back to New York, where we lived for about 13 years. She went home on a vacation, came back and said, I want to go home. And I had to stop and say to her, you realize I teach American history and that I'm a football coach. I don't even know if they play football up in Canada. You do. And that's the other thing that you should know about me, is that I am a football coach. Now, the reason I bring these two things up, that I'm an American and I'm a football coach, is not just to talk about myself, which we all seem to love to do. Oh, and I'm not afraid to talk about myself. But rather, that background is actually important. You should know this about me. I'm fairly conservative. I do believe that children need discipline. I do believe that children need order. I'm not completely on board with Canada's liberal laws about marijuana, and I'm not on board with Canada's socialized medicine. I like rules. I like structure. I like accountability. I like, somewhere in my mind, to see myself as this guy. Jack Donaghy from the TV show 30 Rock. What a great show. So bad, so terrible that's not around anymore. Great writing, great characters. This is how I like to see myself. The reality is that other people probably see me as this. George Bush will be vindicated in 50 years. He will be vindicated. Okay. What's the point? The point is, I am probably the audience that sits here for summer sessions and says, this will not work. I am the conservative white male classic. With that in mind, these are my experiences with UDL. When I moved up here 4 years ago, I took one of the few positions that were available in Winnipeg 1. It was as an LAC teacher, and I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the LAC program is. LAC actually stands for Learning Assisted Classroom, but if you ask an LAC teacher what that stands for, they're going to tell you lazy-ass children. It's a division-wide program, which means that the students who enter the LAC program are not held to the catchment area where they live. And the students that enter there, for lack of a more academic description, are 1 foot in or 1 foot out of the justice system. My students were former and current gang members. My students were former and current sex trade workers. I had members of the Mad Cows on one side, and I had members of the Indian Posse on the other side. It was a very tough gig. 1 year I was assaulted 3 times. I continually learned about my mother's past sexual history by working in this position. But as a 40-year-old white male, changing careers and moving up here, there were not a lot of opportunities in Winnipeg 1, and this position was actually kind of hidden for me because I could also coach football at the same time. And this was at Churchill High School. And if any of you know anything about Churchill High School, it has a long, rich history of having good football teams. So they wanted a football coach. They hid this position until the last round of hiring. Nobody applied for it. Surprise! And this is where I ended. Okay. My first year there was awful. Awful, awful, awful. It got to the point where I was driving to work, and I would get to that 2-block radius away from Hay Street, where Churchill is, and my stomach would start to clamp up. And I remember this clearly because my brother, I had a former brother who's now deceased, big giant guy, made his career as a bouncer. I used to talk to him when I was little, thinking that that was a great thing to do for a living, going to clubs, working at bars, seeing people all the time. He said, it's the worst job in the world. He said, I would get 2 blocks from work and my stomach would start to clamp up because I would think about all the fights that I was going to have to do that night. This is how I felt every day going to work. And how did we run the LAC classroom? It was a multi-age classroom, multidisciplinary classroom. So I would have kids taking 7th grade math, 10th grade English, 9th grade science, and 11th grade, I don't know, biology. How do you deal with multi-age classrooms like that? I dealt with it like the teacher before me. I dealt with it, and the teacher before them had dealt with it. I gave out work packets. Work packets after work packets after work packets after work packets. You're smart people. Think about how these gang members reacted to getting work packets. One of my assaults was getting one thrown right in my face. Okay, that was a tough year. So one of the other great things about moving up here and starting over when you were 40 years old is that the province of Manitoba told me, guess what? You get to go back to university again. You've got to earn 30 credit hours before we're going to permanently certify you. I had been teaching for 13 years. I had a master's degree from a foreign university, but I was still seen as not having enough education. So gladly I came back. And you know what? The crazy thing was, do you remember those dreams that you have where you wake up you're dreaming and you get this letter in the mail that says one of your courses from university has been rejected and you still owe 3 credits? And the only way you can get those 3 credits is by taking an exam tomorrow? I got to live that nightmare. I got to go back to school at 40 years old. One of the best things that happened to me. So many good courses I got to take. Most of them. Best course I got to take was this one. Summer Institute. Now, we should also give you full disclosure. I took it because I could get 6 credits in 2 weeks. No doubt, I'll be upfront with that. But as I started to sit in the back of the room, and I can remember where my chair always was. It was the second row down, right in the middle, and I would have my notebook open, and I would be drawing football plays. I would be listening to all these things that were being said, and the things that were being said were all things that I had done previously. Spirit buddies, class meetings, all the multi-intelligence learning. These were all things I was doing, and it would start to get my attention. I'd say, well, yeah, you know what, this UDL thing, it's not so much revolutionary. This is really just good teaching. And so that started to get my attention. Now, this is one of the crazy things about my time in that first session. Later, not in that first session, I would become friends with Robin and Amber sitting here in the front row. And we have all kinds of great stories of the hijinks that we got into in later classes. But I want to quote Amber about her impressions of me in that first class. We had met a few classes later on down the road, and we were having lunch one day. She said, yeah, I remember you from that first class. And you know, to be honest with you, when you would ask questions, I would always say, oh, that guy's a douche. Her words, not mine. Okay. And in one of the other presentations, Jen referred to me as the guy who was always asking questions at the end of the class that were always questioning the whole concepts of UDL. You know, isn't it crazy how you have this image of yourself, and people have an image of you, and rarely do they match up? You know, when I was asking questions, Jen, it was because I was honestly interested. It wasn't because I was trying to undermine what was going on. Well, anyway, I took the 6 credits. And the next year, I had the chance to start to integrate some of the UDL ideas into the LAC program. Now, this is probably the really important part of the presentation. You know, I like talking about myself. I like showing pictures of my son, but this is really what's going to be important. I should backtrack a little bit. It was really after the second Summer Institute that I started to integrate these things. Here's what happened. We were in the second Summer Institute, and by this time I was already friends with Amber, and I was already friends with Robin, and we were sitting in the back of the room, which we normally do. There's a reason why we do that, and here's why. Do you have it with you? Awesome. Can you bring it out? Because I'll get it on camera. That'll be great. I'm sure Trevor can figure out how to zoom in on this. Okay. We took a class together, a nighttime class that was not as rewarding as the Summer Institute. And because we were inherently mischievous individuals, we were sitting there one time, and I think it was Amber was about to answer a question, and I leaned over to her and I said, I will pay you $5 if you can work the word synergy into your answer twice. She did it, and I broke out $5 American and paid it over to her. And then it just became this wager that we would have. We would make all of these stupid bets during classes. And if you were able to come through with the bets, you got to keep the $5, and you got to sign your name here. And I believe there is actually a signature from Jen somewhere on here. I don't remember what it was you were asked to do.
Mention your name in a workshop.
Awesome. We should put more emphasis on mentioning of my name in every workshop. That's great. But I'm getting to my point, but I can sidetrack on this because Robin and Amber and I felt so comfortable in what we were doing in the UDL classrooms. We knew that we could be very upfront in doing this. and still get all the information that was coming. And that's one of the great things that happens in the culture of the UDL classroom over a long period of time. Your students become comfortable enough to learn the way they want to learn. And the best part, and this is one of the things I'm going to talk about, you become comfortable in your own skin letting them do that. That's cool. That's really cool. Do you remember the phrase Don used once? I don't want to let my students off the hook. And you responded to him, well, why would you want your students on the hook? You don't get there right away with UDL, but you do get there, and that's a great feeling. Anyway, let me get back to the point. We were in class, and it was the three of us sitting at a back table. And I, as usual, had either my laptop open, doing football things, or a notebook open, doing things. And Jen was telling this story, and it was a great story. It was about, is it a niece or a nephew?
Nephew.
It was about her nephew. And the nephew was attending a high school, and that high school was telling Jen's sister or brother? Sister. That high school no longer had the programs that her nephew needed. And they were suggesting that the nephew be transferred to Churchill High School and attend the LAC program. And Jen's response was, and you can correct me, but I'm paraphrasing, this was 2 years ago, response, under no circumstances do you let them transfer your son to that dungeon. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm writing something down. What? Holy shit, she's talking about me! She was talking about my program. Under no circumstances do you allow your nephew to be transferred to the Churchill LAC program where I was the teacher. Now, this had happened a number of years ago, so it actually wasn't me, but that was like one of those startling moments. I said, wow, man. Dungeon. I started thinking about my classroom like a dungeon. And then I started thinking about it more in depthly, that there was a whole lot of truth to that. The kids stayed in that room all day long. I handed them work packets. They never did the work. I struggled to get them to do the work. My EAs were always pulling their hair out. I was getting assaulted. I was getting yelled at. I was literally losing my soul in the joy of teaching. I hated it. So I thought about this a little bit more, and then Jen said something else. She said something along the lines of the non-integrated classrooms, the self-contained classrooms, like an LAC program, are actually against the law. And that really got my attention. I said, no, so then I was raising my hand in the back of the classroom, and then Amber probably was rolling her eyes saying, douche. I said, so you're telling me, Jen, that what I'm doing in my classroom is actually against the law? She said, yes. I said, what law? Canadian Charter of Rights. Wow. That gave me moments to pause and think about this. So one of the cool things about UDL2, the second summer session, was that we were able to be graded based on these conversations and how we wanted to implement these ideas. And so I thought about this for a long time, and Jen and I had a conversation in her office, and I said, I think I want to try to change the LAC program. I think I want to try to break it up. I think I want to dissolve it and move people out. And her response was, yeah, this is doable. It's not going to be easy, but it's doable. So I went back in that year during the summer, and I sat down with my two administrators. At the time, his principal, his name was Joyce Wong, and the vice principal was Dom Zagari, both very good people. And I told them the story, and I told them about Jen said, and I told them what I was feeling, and how I was getting beaten down, and that I didn't feel like I was doing a good service to these students, and the students were getting worse, not better. And that I wanted to break up the LAC room, and I wanted to integrate. And they looked at me after this long conversation, and they paused, and they said, you're right. This is wrong. Let's change it. Administrators get a bad rap from us all the time. And I think that's unfair for the most part. They're just as overworked as we are. Just as overworked. And they have the same impulses to try to do right as we do. This was a great example of it. So, here's what we came in that year and decided we were going to do. I was going to take my kids. It was about 12 of them. And we were going to break them up and put them into classes. Because they were still going to be in the LAC classroom, we were able to provide them with adapted grades. Now, I'm assuming that it's the same in every school district throughout Manitoba, but in Churchill and in Winnipeg 1, adapted grades meant that we had to be able to justify that we had covered 51% of the course with a 50 to give them a passing grade. The way we did it was this. Although I pushed my students out into the regular classes, on paper, they were still being taught by me. So that meant that Shayna, who I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, moved into social studies with Tanis Westfall. And if any of you know Tanis, she was the greatest teacher to do this with. Although she would be taking instruction from Tanis and working with Tanis' students and doing Tanis' homework, when it came time to issue the grade, it was done by me. That gave me a lot of freedom to get around the fact that some of my kids were not up to grade level academically. I was able to do team teaching. Now this is going to be important when we talk about selling UDL. Because the entire school had not embraced UDL, just my program, and I was integrating, I had to then approach these teachers and say things like, I want to move 6 of my LAC kids in. Remember who these kids were now. Former, current gang members. Former, current sex trade workers. I want to move them into your regular class. Most teachers are not going to react warmly to that proposition. So I did have to sell it, and here's how we sold it. I said, not only am I going to move the kids into the classroom, but I'm going to move in too. I'm going to teach the class with you. For instance, when it was physics, I had to tell the, well, not physics, we never moved that high. When it was some of the higher level math classes, I had to tell the teacher, I don't know anything about this. But what I can do is I can teach a basic lesson plan. What I can do is you give me the answer key, I can grade your papers. What I can do is if you need to leave early in the day, I can run the class for you. So what I was able to sell these teachers was a very pragmatic advantage to having these kids come in. Now here's the really cool thing that happened. Let me see if I... No. Here's the cool thing that happened with this. My EAs were able to do the same thing and move into the classrooms. And after a while, the really cool thing that began to happen here is what I found with my LAC kids, the former and current gang members and the former and current sex trade workers, is that their behavior in the integrated class was far better than their behavior when they were in the dungeon with me. And that after a while, the teachers began to forget who was an LAC student and who wasn't. And when I did this presentation in the summer session, there were actually 3 Churchill teachers here. They were sitting in the back corner, and I know the 3 fellows well. And each of them, during this presentation, interrupted and said, yeah, I had Tom's students in the classroom. I didn't know they were LAC kids after a while. That was really cool. Now, this went on for a year. Here's what we had successes with. I had successes with the idea of spirit buddies. And I'm still doing this today. And today I'm finding more of a need for it. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later with my new program. We implemented class meetings just within my LAC class, and this was incredibly successful. I had one morning where a male student shared that that weekend he had been raped by another gang member during a class meeting. How do you get to a place where a kid will admit that and look to reach out for help in a public forum? That's my petri dish evidence that this can be incredibly successful. But most of all, what we found happening was I found myself, my students, and even the teachers that I was mixing in with placing a higher value on relationships than on the curriculum. And you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir right now. I know you know this. But one of the struggles that we're going to find in convincing conservative white males to try UDL is going to be the emphasis on this over this. And in reality, they have to come in the opposite direction. Now, I did have some challenges as well. There were some teachers who weren't really open to the idea of LAC students moving into their classroom. Again, that wasn't the hardest problem. That was easy to sell because I had to sell it to the teachers under this guise that I'm going to make your life easier. This is not going to make your life harder. This is going to make your life easier. You have another teacher into the room. EAs were another challenge. I had to retrain my EAs. I've gotten much better at managing and working with EAs, but when you get into a position where it's your first time working with other adults, it can be really challenging. So they had to move away from the idea that here's a work packet and here's the answer key and I'm going to check that, to where I actually had to have them do some teaching. And for some of them, that was uncomfortable. So the downside of all of this is the administrator that I told you about earlier named Joyce Wong, she ended up going to another school. And a new administrator came in, an excellent one, who was doing great things at Churchill. But one of the first things she did was she rearranged the special ed department. And I moved from LAC to another program. So I'm no longer the LAC teacher there. I'm now in charge of what they call the Senior Center. Senior Center is another exclusive classroom, but students with cognitive disabilities rather than the behavioral disabilities. My life is a lot easier. I can say that for sure. I'm not being sworn at and not being assaulted anymore. That's easier. But one of our other teachers got moved in the LAC, and we would meet prior to the school year starting. And you know, LAC is a crazy place. I mean, you can't know what to do there until you've been there. You really need a year or two under your belt before you even know what you're doing. And so he would ask, how do I do this, how do I do that? And I would take him through the integration model and what I did and why I did it, why I believed in it. And you know, after the conversations, he said, you know what, I think this is the way I want to do it. He said, I don't think this is going to be really easy, but this is the way I want to do it. And he went ahead and he kept the integration model. And the LAC program is still kind of broken up in Churchill today. And my really cool story is that one of the students I mentioned earlier named Shayna, I was in my new classroom and I didn't have any students and I was sitting there working, grading papers, sending them something or other. And Shayna appears in my doorway and I'm working with my head down. And she's just standing there, almost like a ghost in some really weird movie, just standing and staring at me. And so I'm not looking at her, not looking at her, not looking at her, and suddenly she goes, hey! And she stomps her foot, and I look up. And she's just this tiny, tiny little thing. Dark brown eyes, dark black hair, staring at me. And she says, hey! I'm in an 11th grade math class now. Why the hell didn't you do that last year? Awesome. Because she was at about a 6th grade math level, but she was one of the kids I didn't integrate, and she knew better. And now the new teacher did integrate her, and she was very angry at me for not doing it sooner. Awesome, 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 awesome. With my new kids, I haven't integrated them. I haven't. And that's been a conscientious decision to wade into the stream rather than jumping into it. But my point about UDL being just good teaching, what I am doing with my kids that I have in the self-contained classroom, we do spirit buddies, we do class meetings, we place a higher value in relationships and curriculum. These things are just plain good teaching. And even if you don't jump with 2 feet into UDL, these things pay benefits. And I have a whole bunch of examples. One of them I would show is I have 2 students in my classroom. One of them is 21, and they're holding him in high school so he can get adult services. And he's got some serious cognitive disabilities. But one of the things we said the other day when we were talking about spirit buddies, because it wasn't going the way I wanted to, and I was running the Democratic class meeting, I said, should we end it? If we're not going to do this right, maybe we should just do it none at all. And this kid, and I'm going to call him Bruce, looked up and said, no. He said, nobody talks to me until I get to this school. And for those people who are going, mm-hmm, and nodding like we're in a Black Baptist church down in Alabama, you know that that's one of the things that Jen has stressed. The reason you do spirit buddies is because you're going to get kids who come to school and nobody talks to them at all. Right out of his mouth, that's what he said. So my reaction is, to hell with it. We're going to make spirit buddies work. One kid, I'm going to make it work. So, the end of my spiel. I think one of the challenges of UDL is this. It won't work completely unless a school holistically changes. That's my feeling on it. However, the tenets of UDL are just plain good teaching. And I guess I would end with this. This is what my classroom was like before I experienced the UDL workshops. If I had been a student, there's no way I would have wanted to attend an LAC room. And if any administrator had ever suggested that my son Tommy or my daughter Aiden be moved to an LAC classroom, I would fight that tooth and nail, because this is what they were. And not only were the kids getting worse, I was becoming worse. So, although I'm still not happy with the province of Manitoba mandating I had to take 30 more credit hours to become permanently certified, sitting through the 2 UDL summer workshops, best thing that happened to me. Best. Okay, that's my spiel. That's probably more than I deserve. It's been about a half an hour of talking.
Do you want to open it up and see if there's people who have questions or comments?
Yeah, any questions or comments? Yes, a young lady in the front row who I don't know and has never said anything sarcastic ever to me.
Yes, hello. I just wanted for the record to say, she's nicer. I thought you were the douche. I did say it. I lose
You're both dead in my eyes. Yeah.
Tom, I want to thank you for this morning, hearing your story again. Just reminds all of us, I think, that we need to place a greater value on relationships because we're dealing with humans. And 2 years ago, when you shared your story and you said that it was taking the soul out of your teaching, it was the most emotional thing, and there were a lot of emotional things said during that summer institute. It's a very intimate experience, but I thought it was so honest and raw for you to share that, so thank you.
Well, thanks for that. You know, and if there's anything I would tell you, you know, when we talk about UDL, I do place great emphasis on the curriculum. I am that guy. I like rules. But if I can see where this works and that this is a better way of doing it, you can sell this to any conservative teacher. Yeah.
I think it's hard for people to understand because we place such great value on curriculum that in order to get to the curriculum, we need to start with the relationships.
Yep.
They think, oh, the relationships will come when kids experience success. Well, yeah, we just need to.
No, that's wrong. That's wrong.
What's your plan for this program now, Tom?
I don't know. I wish I had a better answer than that. I do have kids that are remarkably low in their cognitive abilities. I don't know, but you know what? They're integrated for gym class. They're integrated for shops. They're integrated for foods. They're integrated for clothing. If they can integrate in those classes and find success, there's got to be a way to integrate them into the academics also. So the basic formula still works. They can work. It's some of the manipulatives that need to get changed in. And this is one of my challenges of UDL. I do think it needs to be a school-wide change. For it really to work, it needs to be a school-wide change. And for a practitioner in WSD, that's really challenging. Because we're large, and for any change to happen, it takes a lot of work. A place like where my kids go, Oak Bank Elementary, they could change this within a year. They could. Lactabani changed it. Oak Bank could. No problem. No problem. Yeah, that would be neat to be in a place that can make a change like that. That would be neat. One of the advantages of being smaller rather than bigger.
Do you need it school-wide, or do you just need enough teachers, a sort of critical mass, where you would then have places to put your kids?
I think we could do it with enough teachers. I mentioned Tanis Westfall earlier, and if any of you, does anybody know Tanis in here? Too bad. She's a great teacher, great lady. My kids moved in there, and right away they were accepted. Right away they were doing things hands-on. Right away it was multiple intelligence, and right away my kids were able to show that they weren't stupid. They were just intelligent in a different strand because she did that. So yeah, I think if you had enough teachers, then you know, as we replace more of the old guard with the new guard coming through universities, you might see that change. But that's just a guess from me. You know, I'm just a foot soldier. Yeah.
I'm interested in this idea of meeting, or preferably having the whole school, and I'm wondering what you think the administrative side, what is the support that you need from administrators to make that happen? And if you would, both at the school and at the division level.
Well, I think my impulsive answer is more administrators like Joyce Wong and Dom Zagari will automatically solve that something was wrong. But I think that the other thing that I find whenever you talk about system-wide changes in whether it's PLCs or UDLs, you need to be able to find time for teachers to be able to plan and implement together. And that's hard. That's hard. How are you going to do that? There's a couple of suggestions to it, but I'm not sure. I know, let's try this again. If I'm a teacher and I'm being approached with UDL, one of the reasons I wouldn't do it is because I don't want more work. And I think it's okay for us to admit that, and also okay, say, yeah, that makes sense. Do any of us really want to take on more work in our already busy lives? So for this to work, an administrator would need to say, okay, I can't create more work for my teachers. I have to be able to show that this is going to create less work. And to do that, there would need to be dedicated time that allows teachers to work together and plan this out themselves. And that would be the other thing. You know, it's one of those cliches that football coaches and teachers use about buy-in. How do you let the teachers structure this themselves? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. But I guess my first response to your question is that administrators would need to find time to allow teachers to do this within their regular working day and not make it more work. I don't know, does anybody else have any ideas on that? Yeah, go ahead.
When you had said like what really made you pop up and pay attention to it was that the policies behind it. And
Yeah, that was for me, yeah.
And that's another part is that a lot of teachers and at all stages in their career don't really know what the policies are that we're supposed to do for our job. And you gotta do that in a way where you educate the teachers on that policy without getting them being defensive about that they're not doing a good job, right? So it's learning about, okay, what is our job? What does MTS and what does the province say that we need to be doing and providing for the students? Because it says right in our Manitoba policy that universally designed classrooms is part of what appropriate education is.
Yeah, and you know what, I think that's a really good point. And when I was thinking to myself, I want to break up the LAC room, I wouldn't have done it unless I known that it was legally viable. I know I wouldn't have suggested it. It would have just been one more of Mr. Walls's crackpot ideas.
I think there is that balance. You have to be careful not to get overwhelmed by the size of the division or the size of the school. Because really, small school, big school, small division, big division, it starts with a core group of teachers who care about kids. It always does start there. And it moves into, from an administrative standpoint, yes, providing the time, providing the ability for those teachers to build their capacity. And there is a balance. I think what Amber is saying is that there's a balance point between, as an administrator saying, this is what we need to be doing, this is our job. So there is a mandate. And at the same time then saying, and here's how I can help you, right, get to that place. But I think, you take a high school like Churchill High School. I'm working with several high schools in another division. And they've done that. They've created common prep times and planning times. They've got teacher teams who are working with specific groups of kids. They've got, and they're big, they're 1,500, 1,800 kids in those schools. So it's doable. There has to be, and is every teacher on board in those schools? No, right? You're kidding yourself if you think every single teacher in the building is. But if there's a core group who begin to work with it and begin to see the kind of progress and gains that you're talking about, and when teachers see that you can take a kid with a significant cognitive disability and put them into grade 11 math and have it work, then it's a snowball that begins to grow. So if you wait to do this until the entire division or the entire school is on board, you'll be waiting forever. You got to start with who's ready and go from there.
Well, and one of the things that you said, and this is a conversation that Amber, Robin, and I have had a lot, there are going to be a lot of teachers and this is going to sound wrong, but let's put it out there, lots of math teachers who are going to not want to do this immediately. And I do think that's where, to a certain extent, we've got to be car salesmen. What do I have to do to put you into this car today? And what we have to do is we have to show them how this will actually make their job easier. And if it had been me, and why did it really appeal to me? Yeah, you know, that was a great image of the kid, the hands on the bars. And, you know, I felt that this wasn't good for the kids. But the reason why it worked for me is I was beginning to hate teaching, hating it. And back home in New York, I taught AP history and law, and I woke up every morning and I said, charge. I loved working with my well-bred, well-fed, well-wed, and well-read kids. I was teaching at St. John's Ravencourt. Now I was in the opposite, and I was hating it. That's what got my attention, as I started to feel that I needed to change something, or else I was going to leave teaching and go work at Costco. Oh, that would have sucked.
You were behind those fires though too, right? Like it wasn't just the kids behind those fires.
Nice metaphor.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh,
I lost those back then.
yeah. Let's not turn this into a hugging and feel good conversation. But yeah, I do think to those who would say that won't work up here, you have to be able to pragmatically sell it. Pragmatic being the key word. Yeah. And I was one of those guys.
And I think, Tom, you also, and this answers John's question a little bit, you need to come back to a why. You need to keep coming back to the why behind the what. UDL is the what. Why are we worried about it? It's the vehicle, as Jen says, to inclusion, right? And I work at a small school. It's just as challenging in a small school as it is in a big school to get buy-in. But as the administrator, everything I say, everything I do, every decision I make as part of that team comes back to inclusive practices and how we're going to get there. And I've had teachers say, oh, I don't want this school to become a UDL laboratory. And I'm like, really? We don't want to be known as a school with good teaching?
Yeah. Really, what, you don't want to do best practices?
Yeah.
Well, and I think when you say sell it, Tom, that's part of the thing with teachers is, I don't know a teacher on the planet who, if they thought they could, wouldn't want to meet the needs of their students.
Right.
So it's about convincing them that you can, that it's possible, and that you can without killing yourself. And that's, I think, what you're saying too, that it has to not be so much work that it's going to put me on stress.
Right.
Right?
You know, I'm certainly not going to tell the Pope how to say Mass.
You know.
But for me, how are you going to make, I think you got to convince teachers this will actually make their job more enjoyable and easier. And that's what got me on board.
And it's true, it does. You enjoy going to school a whole lot more when you work this way.
I think you also need to be honest and say there's a whole lot of work initially because there's that developing that understanding, right? Or else it's not going to work. But I'm going to support you in that by doing this, right? Providing time for you to meet with colleagues and plan together and
But isn't that what every good financial advisor has ever told you? It's front loading. You've got to do the research and the work up front so that when you're ready to retire, it's there.
But I would add that gets easier too. The more you practice that,
Absolutely.
it gets easier too. So that's good for teachers to know that if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah, like I plot out a rubric for in an hour, just for this last one, where the first time we did it, it was like, what, 2-3 days? It was like teeth, but it's like, oh, okay, now that I got it, like it's so much easier.
Thanks, guys.
I have one more question because I think Amber's starting to get sort of there's a technical side to what we do. There's a craft to what we do as well as an art, right? And you said that it's good teaching, but not everybody's doing that good teaching part, that craft part. And we've had Alex is the other big proponent in this group, right, of saying we've got to be laying out what are the skills that we should be expecting of all of our teachers. So I am interested in that part of the conversation. How do we have, so the conversation with administrators is one thing. There's also that conversation with our all of us educators about the professional side of this. If this is good teaching, but we haven't been doing it,
Yes.
how do we have that conversation wisely in a way that doesn't alienate people?
It's the dance that I walk as a support teacher. How do you convince somebody who takes the binder out that they do every year when they do this unit, how do you convince them that, you know, this isn't meeting the need, this isn't working for you, and there's a better way? And it's dancing a dance of how do you do that, have relationship, be able to put those little, plant the seeds and put those ideas in so that people can start to think about, okay, it's not them, maybe there's something that I can do. It's not the kids I have in my class that are worse than the kids that you've had in the years before and that are not. Like if the change has to come from within, and as an educator, we have to all get to that point where we realize that what we're doing isn't working.
But I think it's also that there's not a single right way that's gonna work from now until forever. And that with education as teachers, it's gonna constantly evolve and change as the needs of our students evolve and change, just as everything in our world evolves and changes. So to find like, oh, this is the best lessons, 1 through 25 for this, and I can use it year after year after year, it's not possible. It's not manageable that 5 years from now the kids need the same skills as what they needed then. That it's constantly evolving and changing.
Well, I think that's
What's
part
our
of what's
role in
going
the
on.
conversation in making sure that we're having this conversation more collectively as opposed to in PLCs or in a group like this?
I think like teachers are doing the best that they know
Yeah,
how
yeah.
with the skill set that they have. And it's about providing them with more knowledge, more PD. I know, Jen, you talked about this when you came up to our division. It's about not looking at yourself and saying, oh, everything I'm doing is bad. You're doing what you know is best. And now there's other stuff. Let's learn about it. Let's come alongside teachers and help them and support them with trying this new strategy. Not new strategies.
You know,
but
I actually
supporting them.
disagree to a certain extent with that. I see lots of teachers being very human, doing what's easy, and as long as there's no accountability for doing what's easy, they'll do what's easy. If your kids are pretty capable in the classroom, they're probably going to pass the standardized exam. And if you're just handing out work packets, nobody's going to complain. And so if there's nobody complaining, I think, like a lot of people, it's very human to take the easiest path. Not fun, it's not rewarding. And to what you said, I can remember being in New York and being in a evaluation where my administrator was talking about the steps to the lesson that I did and how they fit right within the PLC stuff. And I said, yeah, well, of course I'm doing that. And she said, but not everybody is. I said, what? How are you not doing these things? So I think your comment is not exclusive to UDL. It's exclusive to techniques of good teaching.
Yeah, I agree.
And I guess, you know, when we're saying it, the connection I'm making was that I had one of my LAC kids in a regular class and they were refusing to take notes. And I started to get upset with it, but then I looked around the classroom and saw a whole bunch of kids refusing to take notes. I said, wait a minute, that's not because my kid's LAC, that's because they're a teenager. Yeah, I don't think that people not doing the skills that we recognize as being important is unique to a UDL technique. You could apply that to any teaching technique, yeah. And I think that's because teachers are human beings, and unless there's accountability, and this is the conservative in me, unless there's accountability, we're going to take the easiest path.
I don't know if it's accountability that's the word that I would use, because one of the things that I've really become more and more focused on, and this last trip to New Brunswick really kind of brought that out, is I think what happens with teachers, which I think probably happens because I've heard this about nurses, about all kinds of professions with sort of a desensitization over time, is that you forget that it even can be fun. You forget why you became a teacher. You get very much into just that it's Monday.
Yep.
You know, I get up and I go, and when you step people back and remind them, why did you become a teacher? what is it because you didn't become a teacher for the money, right? So why did you become a teacher? What were you hoping for? Everybody who ever became a teacher wanted to make a difference in some way, right? And wanted to have an impact. And when you step people back to that space of, oh yeah, like, and kind of ignite that, and when you give them the hope and the belief that it's possible, and it's possible to do in a way that isn't exhausting and going to ruin the rest of your life, right? Because people have families and kids, and you know they can't give 100% of their energy to this part of their day. When you actually give them that hope that there's a way for me to do this that's going to make teaching and learning more engaging, right? Both. That my students are going to be happier, learn more, do better, and that I'm going to enjoy coming to work more. It's amazing to see people who were incredibly resistant heading into that. You know, you literally watch the body language go from the crossed arms to the, right, you know, and it is really, we have been as a profession, I think, incredibly demoralized by a whole lot of factors that we could take a whole day to debate, but everything from the media to the, you know, to actually that accountability agenda, which has deprofessionalized us. It's taken us away from believing in ourselves that we know what our students need and that we know what we need to do and that we can actually trust ourselves to do that, as opposed to, well, I have to get them ready for the exam and I have, you know, and it just becomes this robotic existence. I don't think the accountability is what's going to bring us there. I think taking people back actually into their own humanity and their own relationships and reigniting that, even if what brought them in was a passion for their subject, right? Well, I love science or I love math. Well, do you still love it? Because I doubt you love it if the way you're teaching is that, right? And taking them back into, so what made you love math and how could you pass that on to your students, right? And getting back to that place of bringing emotion and soul and spirit back into what we do. I think we need less accountability and more trust and faith and inspiration. And when we do that, we'll see teachers. The more accountability we build in, the more people just go, that's what you want me to do, fine. Right? And they just actually lose motivation more and more and more. And that's what I'm seeing in the teachers. So we can keep debating that one second.
Hey, good news, I would throw on the table. The latest study that I heard, of all the professional positions, teachers are the most trusted by society.
It's an interesting dilemma that way. And you know, it's always striking to me, I really don't care about standardized exams, you know me well enough to know that. But even if you do care about them and you say, okay, well, Manitoba students didn't do well on the exams. Hello, American students did worse. So why would we want to become more American in order to solve our problems with the exams? That
Do
doesn't
you
make any
really
sense.
want me to have the microphone on?
I'll look the numbers.
You know, they would say
America
about, don't get in an argument with somebody who buys ink by the gallon.
America scores lower than Canada does. That's the truth. It's a fact.
Yeah, but you know, one of the things I found is I came from New York State where we were doing No Child Left Behind long before George Bush came into office. We did lots of UDL stuff, just by different acronyms. And our kids did great on the exams.
Yeah. And I agree. If you
Never
teach well,
spent a
kids will do
lot of
well.
time worrying about the exam because I knew that, and this is where my idea of accountability comes in, not so much on the exams, but rather in what you were saying. I want teachers to be held accountable to the skills in the classroom.
Yeah.
So if I'm an administrator and I sit down for an evaluation, I want to be able to map out some of the things that we would like to see as in techniques being taught. That's my idea of where the accountability needs to be. Because I've seen a lot of classrooms where it's been, here's a work packet, I'm going to give you the grades in 45 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get that, and I understand the complaint about the concern about sort of an outcomes kind of accountability versus a process kind of accountability. We're talking a process accountability. We have practices and we know are the right ones.
kind of
see them.
accountability that other professions have.
Mhm.
There is malpractice in medicine,
Yes.
right? And you are held accountable to a certain standard of practice.
Yeah.
But they don't check how many of your patients, reached a certain level of, 10,000 steps a day or whatever. Like, that's not the way you determine whether a doctor's been a good doctor. So I agree, there's professional practice standards that we should be looking at. But that's different from giving students exams and
And saying
And
85% met the benchmark.
Go ahead, Joe.
It's reminding me of a conversation I actually had earlier this week with a colleague about assessment and UDL, and this is somebody who's doing a lot of UDL things in their classroom. And we were having a conversation about grading in high school and being report card time. And one of the things he said was, I need to start having more tests, and I need to start getting students ready for high school. And my response was, "Okay, don't you bloody dare, because what you're doing is awesome, and I don't think it's the fact that we need to get students ready for something. I think maybe it's the fact that we need to rethink some of the things that we are in fact asking them to do at certain levels. Rather than getting better at doing the wrong things, maybe we need to take a good look at, and high school seems to me to be where a lot of this, maybe we need to take a good hard look at what we're asking them to do."
I had a student, my situation last year was interesting because we were at George McDowell School, which got divvied up. And so now I'm at Highbury, where a big chunk of our population came. So one of the girls that I had last year in grade 5 is now in another grade 5-6 classroom. And on Friday, she comes up to me, and there's 2 of us in 5-6 and another 2 on the other side of the building, and it's like very traditional and crazy hippie teacher is what they're I think they're calling me here. And one of those little girls, she's like, "Miss Britsky, we've had like 10 tests already so far this year." And I smiled and I laughed at her. I'm like, "I gave you tests too, I just didn't call them tests." And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "Every time you came and sat in small group instruction for math. Essentially, that was a test." I said, "Show me what you know about this." You presented at the end of your MI theme day. That was assessment. It was all assessment. And just because one teacher calls it a test and I'm calling it something different, we're getting that understanding of what our students know. And I would even argue that I know more from what I've experienced with them than what the paper pencil test is. And then you could see the little wheels turning in her head, and she's like, "Oh yeah." And then she was kind of upset. She's like, "You tricked us."